Welcome to the NBA Slate Breakdown. I'm Jason Gilbo at jgilbo11, taking a look at tonight's 12-game slate, Big Friday. A lot to kind of go over. We had some news last night with some injuries. Larry Nance, obviously, broken hand, going to be out for quite some time. But most of the injuries, it's pretty light heading into tonight, stuff we already know about. I'm going to start here first with the injuries. Marcus Morris is a guy that's looking to come back tonight. He's probable. It's going to throw a little bit of a wrench into things. So with some of those guys like Tatum, Brown, guys that can play basically between, the 2 and 4 spots. Don't expect him to play a ton of minutes. Obviously, I think I want to see how this rotation plays out a little bit with another body and Brad Stevens, who has been notoriously known for kind of mixing things up as the season goes on. So I don't like Boston a ton tonight, especially not some of those guys like I mentioned right now. So it's not going to have a huge difference on the slate. Tristan Thompson's the other guy. He's going to be out for a few weeks. This is going to push Kevin Love into the center role again. We're going to see some Jeff Green. We are going to see Jeff Green. We're also going to see Jay Crowder play some more minutes. So those guys, we'll have some interest in terms of DFS, more so Jay Crowder. Obviously, Chris Paul still dealing with the knee issue. Not much changes there. We know that Gordon, Harden are going to play all the minutes that they can handle. Miles Turner looks to be iffy for tonight's game. It's still questionable. Obviously, Sabonis has been a guy that we've been riding. Good spot for him tonight if Turner sits. Talk more about him later on. Larry Nance going to be out tonight. Definitely going to open up some more minutes. Kuzma's going to be a lock pretty much for most people's cash games, as he should be, given the fact that, one, he's been consistent even with the fully healthy front court. We're also going to see Brook Lopez, Julius Randle pick up a little bit of the slack as well in the front court. James Johnson's going to be back tonight. We need to keep an eye on the Hassan Whiteside news in terms of minutes. Go into that a little bit later on. Greg Monroe, once again, still out. John Henson is a guy that we'll be looking to target again. Kristaps Porzingis, illness tonight, expects to play. Orlando side's a little bit interesting if Elfrid Payton sits because Augustine's already out with the hamstring. Payton's dealing with the hamstring issue as well. I will talk about that situation as we move into the point guards and small forwards. Outside of that, though, pretty much same stuff. Moving on, Otto Porter should be back. So I'm going to dive in position by position today just because I'm solo. Not going to go game by game just because it's a 12-game slate. I don't have my buddy here, Brent, to kind of guide me with me game by game. So going to shorten things up a little bit. Let's talk point guards on tonight's slate. When we look at some of the high-priced options, obviously, James Harden, Russell Westbrook kind of come in here. Westbrook's interesting tonight, definitely a GPP guy. I think both guys in that game, I think that's actually just kind of one big GPP game to target because of basically you got two of the best defenses in the league playing against each other tonight in OKC. There's a lot of talent, a lot of scoring could be going around. But we also could see a pretty defensive game as well. So Westbrook, his prices are coming down a little bit. He's only 10-6 on FanDuel. He's 11-1 on DraftKings. Obviously still terrific, averaging 1.45 fantasy points per minute this season. Boston's been extremely good against point guards. Kyrie Irving's picked it up a little bit. But you obviously have, guys like Jaylen Brown, Marcus Smart, who can move over and defend, obviously primary ball handlers. So Westbrook, obviously interesting, definitely a GPP guy. The guy that I'm looking at in the top tier to really thrive is John Wall. He hasn't shown off a huge upside game this year, but obviously a usage near 29%. Good spot against Cleveland. Cleveland ranks 29th against opposing point guards. They've been obviously horrendous on the season. So I think at Wall obviously come up in price a little bit from that Suns game. He didn't have a great game against the Suns. Washington, 113 implied total. I think he's obviously one of the guys you can look at on the slate. We move down the list here a little bit. Obviously Ben Simmons, point guard eligible over on DraftKings, small forward as well, power forward on FanDuel. He's kind of all over the place, but once again, continuously you look at Ben Simmons producing at an unreal rate, 1.27 fantasy points per minute. Good spot against Indy, who struggles on defense. Have no issue paying these price tags for Ben Simmons, who's notching near triple doubles on a nightly basis. Seeing pretty good usage behind Embiid on that team. Have no issue going to the well there. I think you can continue to ride them and make them a staple play. That Philly-Indiana game is a good one to target. Kyrie Irving, a little bit cheap tonight. He's 8,400 on FanDuel. I don't mind that price tag at all. DraftKings, he's the same price, but I don't love him as much there. Obviously, 28% usage rate. these are the two best teams against point guards this year defensively. So I'm a little bit hesitant, but obviously Irving's been scoring at will this year. I think he's a great GPP, guys. I think there's plenty of cheaper options you can go with in cash games or use a John Wall or Ben Simmons. So I think Irving and Westbrook scoring off against each other. I'm more in tournament mode with them and just kind of in that game in general. When we look at that Lakers-Nets game, obviously D'Angelo Russell, shooting guard over on FanDuel. Him and Lonzo Ball obviously squaring off against each other, and this is, one of the higher total games. You look at the Nets, 112 implied total, Lakers 114 implied total. We get a great matchup in terms of pace. Matchup, obviously, on paper with defensively is just spectacular. So when we look at these things, I mean, Russell's obviously got the revenge game narrative going back to the Lakers, going back to L.A., a team that traded him to the Nets. So I'm intrigued. His minutes really haven't been there. He's only averaging 26 this year, but obviously we've seen him put up 40-plus fantasy points in these games. A little bit pricey. The 7,900 on DK is a little steep, in my opinion, for the minutes that he's getting. 75 on FanDuel is not bad. He's also shooting guard over there. I don't mind him tonight. Obviously, you got the revenge spot. The ownership's going to be a little bit higher. I think you can justify a reasonable fade if he does put up a dud, because I think it's going to be talked up, and that ownership is going to be a little bit baked based on the revenge game, even though it is a great matchup as well. Lonzo Ball, obviously, usage rate was below 5% last night. He was, not good. He only took 2 shots. Intriguing, GPP play is probably always going to be a GPP guide, mostly depending on the slate. Brooklyn, ranks 27th against point guards. They struggle on the glass. We've seen Ball put up, big games near triple doubles. So I'm okay with using him in tournaments, but that's about it for me. Price tag's pretty decent. He's just kind of more of a correlation play. If you want to stack that game, I think you can get some exposure. As far as other options go, I mean, Ricky Rubio, Kemba Walker in a little bit of a tough spot. Ricky Rubio taking on Toronto, Kemba Walker taking on San Antonio. I'm not in love with it. Same with Kyle Lowry on the other side. Just tough, slow-paced matchups in some of the lower-paced games. I'm not really thrilled. Dennis Schroeder I like in the DK range at 7,100. It's a really nice price tag on him. His number's a little bit inflated over on FanDuel at 8K. 102 total. His usage rate over 30% this year. Houston, middle of the road against point guards. Schroeder's once again going to carry this offense, so I'm okay with going that route. When you look at some of the guys that get into the 6K range, I mean, Drew Holiday, always a reasonable GPP option. I'm more on the front court guys against Dallas than I am Drew Holiday, but I don't mind him. Goran Dragic against Denver, pretty reasonable price tag. This is a guy who's going to get you around 30 to 35 fantasy points. Good cash game guy, 24% usage rate. Denver 20th against point guards this year, so I'm more than cool using Dragic in this spot. If Elfrid Payton plays, I'm going to give it probably a day or two before him. That hamstring is still tricky. I don't always trust the hamstring injuries. Obviously, a good spot against Chicago. I'm just going to go some other directions with Orlando. He's still questionable for tonight's game. Darren Collison's a guy that I like quite a bit. We can continue to look at him in this role. I mean, obviously logging pretty good minutes, over 30 minutes per game, averaging about a point per minute in terms of fantasy points. Philadelphia, middle of the road against point guards. Still 6K on FanDuel. He continues to be too cheap there, 65 on DK. 107 implied total, so Collison's obviously more than good enough for me to use here tonight. When you move down, I mean, obviously I think Jamal Murray's an intriguing option. It's not the best of matchups against Dragic in Miami, but he's still cheap at 5,500. Usage rate right around 25%, so I'm cool with using him. Dennis Smith as well. I think those guys are considerably options to take shots on. Good spots for both of them to really, produce it at a reasonable rate. So when you look at some of the other guys, I mean, I don't mind TJ McConnell. Obviously, you can continue to look his way. He's been an intriguing option, since Markelle Fultz was ruled out for a few weeks. So continue to go back to that well. I mean, 4,900 on DK. They're clearly not going to be pricing him up anytime soon. 57 on FanDuel, starting to creep up a little bit, but I don't mind him. Emmanuel Mudiay is interesting. He's been playing pretty well off the bench. I think we can give him at least a look. But outside of that, it's kind of getting a little bit skimmed in terms of cheaper point guards. Chris Dunn's another one that you can look at. He's shooting guard eligible over on FanDuel, 4,700 on DK, where he's a point guard. Don't mind him. He's been playing pretty well, averaging about 26 minutes off the bench. Turnovers, personal fouls, a little bit risky, but I don't mind going that route. So certainly a good option there. Moving over to shooting guards, obviously when you look at these guys, I think, James Harden's an interesting pay-up option as always in GPPs. I'm not going to be going that way in cash games. I just think overall his production really hasn't been as great. He's not rebounding as well. He can obviously put up any, 60 burger on any given night. But there's plenty of options at this mid-range that I kind of am more intrigued with. Victor Oladipo, once again, is a guy that I'll be looking at. Philly ranks 29th against shooting guards. Oladipo's right around 36, 37 fantasy points per game, 27% usage rate. Devin Booker's in a similar spot. New York has actually been pretty good against shooting guards this year, but obviously the usage and his overall peripheral production has picked up this season. So I've been impressed with Booker. I feel you can go the well him. Kind of going to make things a little bit short here up at the top. I mean, Bradley Beal, Eric Gordon, those are guys that we've talked about quite a bit here over the start of the season. I have no issues paying up with them. I think when you look in the mid-range, we're starting to get into some guys that are in, decent spots here. Kent Bazemore's not in a bad spot against Houston. Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, probably one of my favorite values on this slate. He's 5K on FanDuel. He's 51 on DK. Get some matchup against Brooklyn. Obviously, when you look at those totals, we'll be looking at that game quite a bit in this spot. But, I mean, definitely a good spot for a lot of these guys. Tim Hardaway Jr. obviously picked up the usage. I'm going to continue to give him a look moving forward. Even at higher price tags, I mean, we knew he was going to come in and pick up quite a bit of usage. And even if Porzingis sits, I mean, the usage is going to go a lot to Hardaway tonight. You're going to see Cantor pick up some of it, but we'll talk about the front court if he sits. But I expect, obviously, Porzingis to play. Evan Fournier, decent spot for him, but he's a little bit pricey for me on this slate. I think at a 12 game, there's plenty of other options that you can look at. Karis LeVert is a guy, once again, I don't mind going to the well. He's averaging about 27 minutes per game this year, seeing right around a 20% usage rate. So I'm cool with him. Obviously, the Lakers rank 26 against shooting guards. LeVert's an intriguing option. He's played a little bit next to Russell, so he's very much in play. But in terms of guys, I mean, really, the values of this slate, you can take a look at, Will Barton. He's pretty cheap. He's a decent usage rate off the bench. As far as other options go, I mean, JJ Barea, Devin Harris are intriguing options in terms of just their values in this spot against New Orleans. Marcus Smart is an interesting GPP play at his price tag. When you look at the matchup, I think he's going to be needed on the court a little bit more. High risk, high reward type of guy, especially if he can generate some steals, but good spots. But I think when you look at it, this is kind of a mid-range night for some of these guys. Once again, Gordon in a good spot. He sees a terrific usage rate, playing heavy minutes right around 33 per game. Deion Waiters is in another good spot. He's still pretty cheap on DK. He's 5,800, 63 on FanDuel. Don't mind the spot there. We look at small forward. This is a spot where obviously you have Giannis up top. Not going to rule him out in GPPs, but he's a little bit expensive. I'm just going to lock in LeBron James tonight here. 109 implied total. Obviously, tremendous usage. We look at small forwards against and power forwards against Washington this season. They're just ripping them apart. We saw it with TJ Warren the other night. I'm going to continue to go that way here, averaging right around 50 fantasy points per game. No one really contends with him defensively. So I'm going to take the discount on him at 10-6 on both sides and kind of go there. Paul George in a decent spot here for a little bit cheaper, 76, 75 minutes, averaging right around 33 points per game. Don't mind him in this spot. Him and Carmelo are basically GPP plays on this slate, I think, in their respective spots. Guys like Otto Porter, Brandon Ingram, nice kind of overlooked mid-range guys on this one. Good spots for both these guys. Porter back from the illness tonight. He's been playing really well this year, averaging 39 fantasy points per game, 1.22 fantasy points per minute. In a pretty good spot here against Cleveland, who are middle of the road. Against, small forwards, power forwards. They're going to line up a little bit differently tonight with Markieff Morris back. He's going to play about 15 minutes. It's kind of going to take a little bit away from Oubre. And obviously, Smith is not going to play any minutes. So I think you can obviously go the well with some of these guys. Brandon Ingram's an interesting play on tonight's slate. Seeing right around 20% usage rate. Brooklyn, 27th against small forwards. He's playing reasonable minutes, right around 32 per game. And he's been producing that at a really solid rate. I'm intrigued with Ingram in tonight's game, especially coming off a back-to-back. I'm not really tremendously worried with the Lakers. Obviously, a tough loss in Portland last night will come down. But when you look at this spot, I mean, Damari Carroll, TJ Warren, Taurean Prince, these are all tremendous mid-range guys in this spot who are kind of averaging right around 28 to 32 fantasy points per game. I think this is a good range to stick in if you don't want to pay up at small forward, but you don't want to dive down, because it's not really that great, in terms of cheaper small forwards. You have guys like Wesley Matthews, who's pretty cheap. He's playing a lot of minutes. It's kind of the only reason to play him. Wilson Chandler's a shot in the dark on any given night where he's playing right around 30 minutes per game, but he's not producing a ton, just 0.65 fantasy points per minute, not getting a lot of usage either. So I kind of think the mid-range is really where you're at in the small forward spot. That's kind of where you want to be sitting. Carroll, Warren, Prince, obviously Hardaway's in a decent spot, in Ingram. Those are kind of the main options that you really should be looking at if you're not going with LeBron James up top. Power forward, obviously with the Larry Nance news last night, you expect Kuzma and Julius Randle to be pretty popular plays on tonight's slate, in a good spot against Brooklyn, who bad against power forwards, centers, rebounding, you name it. Randle obviously hasn't been playing a ton of minutes. He's going to step up a little bit more. I just still don't expect him to be a 28-plus minute guy. I still see him playing in probably the 25, 24-minute range, if I had to guess. But not a bad spot for him here. I'll go with him in a couple GPPs, but I think Kuzma's obviously the guy, and the guy that the Lakers want to kind of lead the way moving forward. He's been the safer option, even with a healthy front court. So obviously very cool with him. But as far as the top end options go, I mean, when you look at Anthony Davis, when you look at DeMarcus Cousins in this spot, Dallas, I mean, obviously very bad against bigs. They struggle on the glass. They're allowing a ton of fantasy points this year. They obviously still don't play at a huge pace, which hurts a little bit. But Davis, obviously the GPP guy. I have no issue with Cousins in any format if you can build around them. I'm not making them a huge priority, but we've seen the upside, we've seen the floor. There's no denying those two with over 30% usage rate on both sides. So obviously good to go with them. If Porzingis plays tonight, obviously he's a top end option, and you get him at a little bit of a discount. 94, from some of the other guys. Obviously we're not talking huge discount. 94 on FanDuel, 88 on DK. Good spot against Phoenix. He's taken a ton of shots. Usage rate is there. We can kind of look at him as basically one of the premium options if you don't want to go all the way up to a double-digit price guy. So really don't mind him. Orlando and Chicago have two interesting guys that I'm intrigued with, Lauri Markkanen and Aaron Gordon, both playing really well this year. Markkanen's still at a reasonable price. We finally saw the upside in that last game. Orlando ranks 29th against power forwards. They do defend threes pretty well so far this year. But I like Markkanen here in this spot. He's going to fire away, grab some rebounds, averaging right around 30 fantasy points per game. So he is in a good spot. And Aaron Gordon playing really well, 20% usage rate, 1.25 fantasy points per minute this season. Chicago 25th against power forwards. So really no issue with going to those two in any format on this slate. Look at some of the other options, guys like Millsap, Carmelo Anthony, Tobias Harris sitting in this mid-range. Millsap's in a decent spot against Miami. They haven't been great against power forwards this year. Millsap's picked up his play over the last few weeks. Still kind of lower price. He's creeping up a little bit on FanDuel. He'll go lower owned tonight with probably most of that game, actually. So I don't mind going there. Implied total 109 for Denver. It's kind of a sneaky total because I don't think it pops up because Miami is still kind of a notable name defensively. So really, I once again have no issue with using those guys in GPPs or in cash games. Tobias Harris, a little bit of a risky play, but I don't mind him at his price in the mid-range. He's 6,700 on FanDuel, 66 on DK. Good spot for him. Milwaukee, once again, I don't mind targeting the wings, guys that can score against Milwaukee. They're going to put up points, so feel free to use them. Rondae Hollis-Jefferson, interesting GPP play tonight's slate. I'll never trust him in cash games. Playing right around 27 minutes per game, 1.07 fantasy points per minute this season. Lakers obviously 28th against power forwards. I think we can kind of look to him in GPPs. Just because I think there's better options in cash games. I mean, you have John Henson, who's power forward eligible. You have Randall, you have Kuzma, those types of guys. So good spots for really all four of those names in that game. I'm not going to talk about it really anymore here the rest of the way. If you're looking for, even cheaper guys, I mean, it's kind of hard to trust, but you do have some of the Phoenix guys like Chris, Bender, Len, who can play and produce minutes at any given rates. So I don't mind it. A guy that actually I forgot to mention over at small forward is Jonathan Simmons, playing a pretty big role here with Orlando, averaging right around 26 minutes per game. I kind of missed that situation, but if Elfrid Payton sits tonight, you're going to see Shelvin Mack and Jonathan Simmons be primary ball handlers there for Orlando, and really no other backup guys. So both have huge, reasonable upside. Mack is super cheap point guard, but Simmons is still 5K on DK. He's 5.2 on FanDuel. Probably a safer option. I don't mind going his way on this slate. Move to center here. A lot of guys that I do like on this one for centers. I mean, obviously Cousins, Davis in that spot. When you look at Joel Embiid, played 30 minutes last game. That was kind of a surprise to me. He obviously was producing at a terrific rate, as he always does. 1.53 fantasy points per minute. I mean, usage rate right around 28%. I like him here tonight. 8,300 on DK, still a nice price tag. 93 on FanDuel's a little bit up there, but with his production, I don't mind it. Indiana, 22nd against centers, average rebounding team. So I definitely don't mind Embiid tonight. When you look at some of these other guys, so it's a little bit tough to use. Jokic is in a tough spot, but I don't mind him in GPPs as always. Rudy Gobert is a decent GPP option. Andre Drummond. I like tonight, Milwaukee struggles rebounding once again. Drummond's a guy who's been playing pretty well this year, starting to get up in price tag a little bit. It'll keep the ownership down. I think all these guys will kind of cut into each other, so definitely don't mind it. One of my favorite guys actually on tonight's slate is Nikola Vucevic, 22% usage rate. He's had a couple of down games in some really tough spots, but gets a nice rebound spot here against Chicago. They rank 24th against centers, bottom 10 in fantasy points allowed. So I definitely don't mind going back to the well there in that spot. I think Vuce is a really intriguing GPP option on the cheaper side as well compared to where he was kind of climbing up to. 7,500 on FanDuel, 72 on DK. So really good spot for him. And as we kind of move down the list here, I mean, once again, you have Domantas Sabonis. If Turner is out in a good spot, playing really well, right around 31 minutes per game, 1.15 fantasy points per minute. Clint Capella in a really good spot. Atlanta struggles on the glass, struggle against centers. Capella's been playing pretty well. Minutes have been obviously a little up and down. Some guys in the front court like Nene are possibly going to be out tonight. So that's, obviously a couple bodies that can help, Capella solidify his minutes a little bit. So definitely a good spot for him. Don't mind going to the well there. We've been talking about Capella quite a bit here at DFC, so good spot. But as we kind of move down here, I mean, talked about John Henson, not in a bad spot. He's center eligible only on DraftKings. He's power forward on FanDuel. Dirk Nowitzki's a guy you can take a look at on the slate. He's still really cheap. Going to go out there and probably get you right around 25 fantasy points on tonight's slate. Robin Lopez is interesting in terms of GPPs. He's going to be a guy who can put up 30 fantasy points, on any given night. Orlando, pretty average on the glass or average against centers. He's still pretty cheap, 62 on FanDuel, 56 on DK. So I don't mind it. If for any reason that Porzingis does sit, I think we can look at Cantor. We can look at Kyle O'Quinn, kind of fill some of the needs in the front court as GPP options. Probably nothing more in that spot, just because they're kind of high risk, high reward guys, and they may even look to go small. Another GPP guy, definitely look at Brook Lopez tonight. Should pick up some more minutes. Hasn't been playing a ton this year, but we saw him kind of creep into the 28 range last night. Played pretty well. Good spot, obviously, against Brooklyn, his former team. I wouldn't call it necessarily a revenge game, but maybe look to him have a little bit of an edge. Steven Adams. This is a guy who continues to be too cheap. 6,800 on FanDuel, 6K on DraftKings, averaging right around 32 fantasy points per game. Not seeing a big usage, but obviously filling out those stats, and just in terms of blocks and steals, he's averaging 8 rebounds per game. I just think you can kind of continue to look at him as a safe play on these slates. He's only been under 30 fantasy points just twice this season, against Chicago in a blowout and against Utah in a tough spot. So other than that, I just think you kind of continue to look at him. And, if you don't want to pay up at center, you can just go ahead and plug in Steven Adams. Not a bad spot here against Boston. So that's going to wrap it up for me. You can head over to dailyfantasycafe.com. Cheat sheets up, lineup optimizer up as well. And good luck tonight.